Good morning. It's the worst black eye for the Vancouver City Police Force in many years. A man, Michael Jacobsen, was brutally beaten in the city jail around 5 o'clock in the morning on September the 30th, 1983. He was so badly beaten, he is getting an out-of-court settlement for $75,000 in costs for his permanent injuries. But who did it? It seems to be a crime that the police cannot solve, at least not yet. Nobody on the force will admit to seeing the beating. The jail records are blank for that night. Somebody on the force lied. Somebody is suspected of perjury. Nobody has been fired. Nobody has been charged. The guilty man or men are still on the force. Yesterday, Chief Constable Bob Stewart issued a very blunt bulletin to the entire 1,000 men and women in the force, and part of it said, in this case, the only side heard of the beating were those of the complainant and his witness, a fellow inmate. The department could say nothing in response because, according to the jail records, no untoward incident took place and the subsequent civil suit became virtually indefensible. That bulletin also says the following. A member or members that broke the rules that night with the complaint of assault as a result, then hid within the rolls of evidence, ashamed to identify themselves, and there they remain in hiding to this day, protected not by departmental procedure but by the same rules of law that protect each and every citizen. And the chief says this is a disgraceful episode for us all. But what is particularly repugnant is the fact that some members were prepared to drag their immediate colleagues through a criminal investigation and public inquiry because they lacked the courage and integrity to be accountable for their actions. The predictable judgment of their peers must remain on their conscience. The file remains active should it ever become possible to prove the perjury that is suspected. Now, you must now see a small clip from the man Jacobsen, the man with a permanent injury after the jail beating.
And next thing I remember, I was on the floor on my stomach, a bunch of police officers around me, and one of them stomping on the back of my leg on the concrete floor. And about the third time that my knee hit the concrete from this officer stomping on the back of it, it just broke in half. And I started yelling and pleading, screaming, because I was in pain instantly.
Chief Constable Bob Stewart of the Vancouver City Police Force is in the studio this morning and will answer my questions and your questions too on this troubling affair. On the program today too, we've got a man who's going to toughen up the Young Offenders Act in Canada, and that is the Solicitor General Perrin Beatty, who said yesterday,
among the moves we've discussed and which I'll be recommending to Parliament are Young Offenders Act changes that will first enable authorities to deal effectively with young offenders who, for example, violated probation conditions. Secondly, which will allow publication of names in certain circumstances where public safety is involved. Third, which will give police more flexibility in detaining young offenders. And fourth, which will ensure that sequential crimes don't go unpunished.
And thirdly on the program this morning, we have Ted Schellenberg, Conservative MP from Nanaimo-Alberni, who's trying to do something very positive about jobs on the island, a rookie MP on Action for Jobs. But first, after the break, Chief Constable Bob Stewart of Vancouver City Police Force.
Dosed would be, see, in a civil suit.
Chief Constable Bob Stewart, the public are quite obviously baffled by the fact that the city has to pay out $90,000 for a man who was beaten up in the city jail, and it seems that you can't do anything about it. Yeah. Nobody fired, nobody suspended.
Well, Jack, I think by now you and most of the citizens know if there was something that could be done in this case, I would have done it. I've done everything possible within law to identify the officer responsible and to take the necessary action. I've not been able to do that. The complainant, Jacobsen, cannot identify the person responsible, nor can any of the independent witnesses, other inmates in the jail on that occasion. What more can I say except that I must work within the rules of law. I've done that. The complainant has had his case fully investigated by the best of investigators. The matter has been to a public inquiry. It's been aired. All of the evidence has been presented. I presented that evidence at the public inquiry through my officers that conducted the investigation. You know, one thing about all this, Jack, I'm really upset that we're labeled as covering up as a department. That's not true. The police department has not covered anything up, have worked very hard at trying to find who's responsible. There's no question that a couple of people are covering up, and that's on their conscience and will be for a long time.
Let me take it from here now. From the time the man was beaten up in jail, and there's no argument he was beaten up by a policeman or policeman in jail.
The evidence would point to that.
And it would seem like it was the bad old days of 30, 40 years ago, whereby a couple of policemen would stand in front of the cell so that anybody nearby couldn't witness the beating up properly.
Well, you described the scenario. That's quite possibly the way it happened.
Now, but was there an immediate investigation, and was it done by a proper criminal investigation team?
No question, no question. Any allegation of assault, even though it may simply be excessive use of force under the Police Act, you know, police officers are entitled to use force where and when necessary. And, you know, let's not fool ourselves. Mr. Jacobsen is no stranger to the city jail, and he was a difficult prisoner, and there was a need to use some force. Now, the question is...
You don't really know that because you can't get any statement from the policeman who handled him.
Well, we know that from policemen who dealt with him on the street prior to him arriving at the jail. This was not a kid glove kind of exercise. It was a difficult exercise, and these things happen with a lot of regularity. But at any point, when Jacobsen left us and went to hospital, he subsequently came back to us and complained of assault. My internal investigators, and who are handpicked, who are excellent at their jobs, conducted a full investigation on the basis of a criminal allegation, the allegation of assault. That file was presented to the Crown. The Crown simply said, who do we charge? You have not identified. Jacobsen and the other witnesses in the jail cannot positively identify any of the officers involved.
And none of the officers involved would make any statement of any kind admitting any culpability or any witnessing of any beating.
That's quite correct. Some of the officers have said in their statements, I did not witness anything, and they are telling the truth because they didn't witness anything. Some officers have said, I didn't witness anything, but they are lying because they did. And now the question is, who is lying?
So you do this investigation in the greatest detail, you give it to Crown Counsel, and Crown Counsel says, we can't identify anybody, we can't charge anybody?
That's right. The same as in any other case. Just try and change the picture slightly to an incident that happens in a public place. Someone breaks a window. Someone slashes a person with a knife. You can't charge a room full of people. You must charge the person responsible. And we haven't been able to do that.
It's conceivable, therefore, that a group of policemen or citizens, but let's say policemen, involved in an incident where somebody gets killed or beaten can merely refuse to testify against each other, and if there's no independent evidence, there is no charge.
That's quite correct. And it's not uncommon. You know, and we see it every day when we approach witnesses in public with people who selectively forget what they saw. I mean, these things happen. Unfortunately, in this case, it happened with police officers.
But policemen are in a special status in the eyes of the public.
No question.
Should you not have power and suspicion, or have you not got power and suspicion to fire men whom you suspect of lying and let them sue for wrongful dismissal?
And they would win. And we would use taxpayers' money to pay them back wages for the time they were suspended.
Might that not be worth it in a case like this?
I don't think so. I think that if anyone has to practice the law and extend the rights of an individual, it has to be the police department.
What about suspensions, therefore? Were any of these men suspended with or without pay during the investigation?
No, they weren't.
Would that not have been a pressure tactic to use?
Well, unfortunately, the Police Act in this province says that if I suspend a person, I must pay them for the first 30 days of suspension. And at the end of that 30 days, they have the right to state their case and to argue, if you like, that they should be paid for the continuation of their suspension.
Are the laws too helpful to policemen under accusation? Would you like to see them made a bit easier so that a policeman whose trust is his whole badge and his whole life can be fired on suspicion.
I think the first people we'd hear from are the civil libertarians who say that the policeman's rights have been violated. He has rights as an individual prior to being a police officer, and he has no special rights as a police officer.
Now, next question. People will say Vancouver City Police, no matter how good the investigation was, have been investigating themselves. Should we not change the system to ask the RCMP or an outside agency to invest all cases of police brutality in the city jail?
No, that's been suggested many times, and you know, in any place where that's ever been tried, where you take an outside body, a civilian review board or whatever, you get less cooperation from the police when that occurs. You know, 99.9% of the time, we have no problems in respect of these matters. This particular case is a particularly bad one because we have been able to narrow it down to a handful of people. And Jack, I only can say again that if there is any evidence whatsoever comes forward that would indicate who the responsible people are, you can rest assured that there would be charges laid.
So therefore, Chief, you're telling me that on your force you've got a couple of liars or a couple of perjurers and a couple of people with selective memories, and you must tolerate them on your force if and until you get enough evidence to charge somebody.
That's right, but these couple of people that you refer to, I would hope, are the same two people.
It must be a most frustrating experience for you. What about lie detectors?
You can't use a lie detector in our system of law. They're not acceptable in terms of evidence, and you can't even use the evidence that someone refused a lie detector test against them. Lie detectors are simply an investigative aid available if an individual requests it for his own use.
More with Chief Constable Bob Stewart, and I'll be taking some calls too after the break. I see a little bit of a complaint in your statement here in which you say, after the initial incident, the matter was referred to a public inquiry. It was here that the press should have attended and fully reported the facts disclosed. What difference does it make whether we report them now or reported them at the hearing?
Well, I was particularly disturbed the other morning with the headlines in the morning paper which alleged a massive police cover-up. I think the record should be set straight that the police department haven't covered up at all. Certain individuals have. And I hear certain members of the media calling for public inquiry. In fact, I know of one or two that have approached the Attorney General and asked him to conduct an inquiry. I think what the media is saying, let's have a new inquiry that we can attend because we missed attending the real one, which occurred in public some time ago.
You're telling me about the public inquiry before the Vancouver Police Board.
That's right.
But at the same time, in defense of the media, I must say a public inquiry might look at a point which we discussed already, that perhaps there should be a civilian review board. Perhaps the city police or the RCMP should not investigate brutality within their own confines.
Well, I think if you were inventing something new that would be worth looking at, but that's been looked at many, many times.
Tell me this, there was a public inquiry in front of the police board at which the Crown presented all the witnesses. Is that correct?
No, in a public inquiry in front of the police board, the officers would have been represented by counsel.
And where?
And were. And the complainant would be there, and all of the witnesses or anyone who had anything to do with the incident would be called, and the board has the power of subpoena, and they would be called to the inquiry, and all of the facts in the case would be aired publicly.
And came out at that time.
And it all came out at that time.
And there is a transcript.
And there is a transcript.
And that shows the policeman who said Webster, I don't recall, I can't remember, I don't recall, I can't remember.
That's right.
It was all there.
It's all there.
But then the civil litigation, writs were issued in the civil litigation, but that never did go to court, did it? There could have been another civil trial of it.
That's correct. There could have been a trial in the civil courts as a result of the writ being obtained by Mr. Jacobsen. That didn't occur. The city chose to settle out of court.
Did you recommend, would you ask for your opinion on whether or not you should settle out of court?
Well, you have to understand that once it's gone beyond the public inquiry stage, that I'm virtually out of the picture. I have no way of affecting the outcome of civil suit. The city would assign its lawyers, corporation counsel, and they would review the case and decide whether or not it was was in the city's best interest to settle out of court or not. And unfortunately, I don't get involved in that.
Yeah. Now, when you presented the evidence to Crown Counsel of the investigation, the criminal investigation done by you into your own department, it was Crown Counsel that said no charges.
That's right.
Would that go to the Director of Prosecutions in Victoria that we used to have?
Well, as I understand it, the policy within Crown Counsel is if a police officer involved, it goes to the senior member of the Crown, which would be the senior member in this region.
So just to sum up my section of it, you are unhappily convinced that you've got a couple of bad actors on the force, and because of cover-up in terms of selective memories, you can't do a damn thing about it.
That's right. My hands are tied at the moment because I must work within the law. If I could work outside of the law, and of course there would be repercussions to that, then I could solve the problem as far as I'm concerned.
Can you mark the records of the men who were questioned and about whom you may be doubtful? Can you mark these men and give them some kind of, what's the word, bad report?
Well, first of all, if I do mark their records, then they have the right to have access to the labor courts of this province that say I've disciplined them before I've been able to prove them guilty of an offense.
Can you mark the records on suspicion at all?
Jack, I don't think my memory is that bad, and there is a file. It's right here.
Calls. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Jack. Good morning, Bob. I'd just like to know if a police officer, if a person wants to charge a person with, let's say, assault, and...
Are you on the topic? What's your question about this case?
Well, I just want to know how you go about charging...
I'm not wasting my time on that. Go ahead, please.
Yes, I have a very similar case to that. And I witnessed two beatings right in the cell there, and that was only less than a month ago.
Did you report it to me?
Yes, and I wrote a letter in, and I got a nice letter back. And
it's under investigation then?
That's right,
All
and
right.
they even phoned me, and I haven't heard anything since, but then it's lots of time yet.
So you're happy with what's been done so far?
Well, I'm so far, yes, but I want to complain about is when they have a holding tank there that's 8 feet by 8 feet with no bathroom facilities, why must we stand and urine in there?
Well, I don't know what he was arrested for. If he was arrested as a drunk and he was in the drunk tank, experience will show that there's nothing in that room, period. I mean, I don't want to start talking about how you design jails.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, hello. Good morning.
Good morning.
Yes, I'd just like to say that I've been in the Vancouver jail, and I've seen people beaten up there by the police. I've been beaten up by the police. Anybody...
Go on.
Let's have a specific, not general statement about it.
I mean, many people have been beaten up by the police because they were trying to beat up the police.
Well, I'm not talking about people trying to beat the police up. I think the police in Vancouver have their... if they pick a drunk up off the street, it seems common procedure to beat him up before you set him away for the night in the drunk tank.
Chief Stewart?
Well, how do I react to a silly statement like that police pick up drunks just to beat them up?
We take them to detox centers too, and we let them out when they're sober if there's no offense, correct? Go ahead, please.
Hello?
Yep.
Yes, I worked in the area for 8 years between the years of 70 and 78.
Hold on a second, ma'am. What I'm looking for comments this morning is some reaction to this particular situation, not a nostalgic memory of what happened in the past. Let's take a break, and I'll be back with more calls after the break. Go ahead to Chief Stewart, please.
Yes, good morning. I'd like to know how many hospital staff were called to give evidence of Mr. Jacobsen's condition. We see a lot of people being brought in by members of the Vancouver City Police, and speaking to some of them, they are scared then to go and press any charges against the police officers if they did indeed use force on them. And I'm going to hang up now so as I can listen to your response. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, the nurse came and saw Jacobsen at 5:30 in the morning, did she not?
Well, at any given time in the jail there are at least 2 medical personnel, 2 nurses available. And on this occasion, one of them did attend to Jacobsen and did make a note in her logbook that he complained but the nurse's assessment was such that she didn't believe at that point in time that he required hospitalization.
But when he got out at 10 o'clock in the morning, nobody even called a cab, as I remember, to get him to the hospital.
No, he left the jail under his own power and subsequently went to hospital, as I understand it, according to his statement, on his own.
On his own, that's correct. But the nurse gave evidence at the inquiry, did she not?
She did, yes.
And she kept the records in the book?
Yes, she did.
Now, that night in the jail, were the city policemen supposed to keep... They must have had an entry of Jacobsen in the book.
Oh, there's no question that the logbook shows that he came and went, but it shows nothing in between.
Everybody had forgotten to... And it's the duty if a man is injured to put it in the book and give the circumstances of, and write a report on it.
That's correct.
If his injury is a result of using force to get a man into a cell.
These procedures are in place and have been for a long time, pardon me, and of course are the sum total of a lot of experiences we've had, and the procedures are quite adequate.
Do you get many complaints about, from people who have been in the city jail? I can understand a guy put in the drunk tank and all the problems that are in there, coming up and complaining the next day, but do you get many complaints of actual brutality, unreasonable force being used by officers in the jail?
Well, let me say, first of all, that any complaint is too many, but we do get them. You know, and in the context of the total number of people we deal with over a period of a year, maybe 20, 25,000 people, maybe in a given year I might hear of 3 or 4 incidents
which require investigation,
that are similar to this kind of complaint.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, my question is, when police go into a residence and find quantities of illegal drugs and no one will admit to owning them, they will charge everyone there. Why can't this be done with the police officers involved in this?
Well, because the laws are related to the possession of property, there are some assumptions that can be made by the Crown that a person who operates a car in which certain items may be found can be deemed to be in possession of that item. Now, that's much different than a case of assault where it's a question of one-on-one. You know, if you could lay a conspiracy charge, if I could prove that 1 or 2 or 2 or more members conspired to cover up some sort of incident, if I could prove that, I might be successful in the criminal courts. I just have to keep assuring the public that I've done everything that I can do in the context of law and with the assistance of Crown, who give us direction from time to time. I'm at a dead end, and I'm not happy about it.
I remember when you were the other side of the fence of the police union, you were complaining about the lack of protection policemen had in the course of investigations against suspensions and whatnot. Am I right?
That's right.
And tell me, has the pendulum, in your opinion, swung too much the other way, or dare one say that nowadays?
Well, it's difficult to say that, because to say that is to suggest that a policeman shouldn't have the same rights as every other citizen. There's no question that for the last 10 years, the Police Act came into effect in this province in 1974. Prior to that, a policeman had virtually no rights in terms of disciplinary matters. I think what we've seen is we've gone from one very extreme to the other extreme, but that's where everybody else is at the moment, the question of civil rights.
Yeah, but you couldn't dare advocate that civil rights be lessened for police officers.
Well, you know, I don't think I'd get very far with that, nor do I propose that any particular group in society should have less rights than anyone else.
Go ahead, please.
I got 2 questions. The Ontario Attorney General was on Jack Webster's program the other day, and he said flatly, you cannot have a cover-up if you really want to get at the truth, vis-a-vis Watergate, etc. Second question, why would any independent witness testify in court when judges in recent cases are basically calling them liars? Now, I'm really mad, Jack, because you missed something there that what that so-called officer just said to you. This is nothing but a public relations job to cover up police brutality. He said we only get 3 or 4 cases of this nature. In other words, it's 3 or 4 cases of serious things. It's probably hundreds of minor slaps and kicks and punches. It's common knowledge that there is plenty of police, really, as you can see, police brutality in the city, and he's sitting there doing nothing but a public relations cover-up.
Well, thank you.
What do you say to that?
Well, I'd say he's wrong.
Garbage.
Sure.
Mind you, I can remember the day 25, 30 years ago, and so can you, Bob, when the city jail was a pretty rugged establishment, was it not?
No question. That used to be a hell of a place. And I would suggest that over the last 10 years that it's cleaned up. I mean, look, nobody likes to be in this business. I'd love to be out of the jail business. Put those officers on the street where they belong doing police work. I can't get out of this system. I'm the only major city in Canada that still runs a city jail.
You mean the other
everybody else uses the provincial facilities. And that's where these prisoners should be. They shouldn't be in a city lockup.
Go ahead, please.
Hello.
Yes.
I would like to ask the chief of police there, did he know who was in the room?
Yes. Just a minute. Do you know, you don't know who was, all you know are the men who were there on that shift at that particular time that night, isn't that right?
Well, no, that's no problem. I know who was in the jail. I know what officers were on duty, and all those officers were in the public inquiry.
No, Jack, what I'm asking him is, does he know who was in the room the time the guy was being beaten?
I think that's what I've just told you. We know who the
Just tell me then.
We know what prisoners were in the jail, and we know what policemen were in the jail, and they've all been the subject of the inquiry.
The problem has been, as you said pretty brutally in your public memorandum, that apart from a cover-up by certain officers in that area at that time, that you suspect perjury.
Well, it's clear to me that someone is not telling the truth, and in my view, that's perjury. Particularly in the context that we've had a public inquiry where evidence is given under oath.
Do you think that any more public inquiries are necessary in this case?
No, I fail to see what that would accomplish. You can put everybody through the hoops again if you like, but it's not going to accomplish anything.
How badly will this hit at the morale of Vancouver City Police Force?
That's my biggest concern, because 999% of these, or 999 of my 1,000-man force, are good, responsible people out there trying to do a very difficult job under difficult situations. And all we need is something like this to give us all a black mark.
And that black mark being that the cities had to pay out $90,000 to a man who was so badly beaten in the city jail, and you cannot, it's a crime you can't solve.
That's right. And that happens fairly regular in the day-to-day work of police departments.
You noticed the flood of calls this morning about the city jail. Is the city jail a clean, well-kept place now in normal circumstances, and not, assure me, like the one I used to know 20 years ago?
No, it's much better than it was, Jack. We're now required to meet certain standards, and we meet those standards for a lockup. You got to remember, there's a difference between a city jail and a remand center or a penitentiary. We're dealing with many, many people who are under the influence of drugs and or alcohol and are high-risk prisoners at the time they come into custody. The next day, they're much easier to deal with, and that's what we see in the other institutions.
Have these men been removed from any contact with the city jail and are presumably now all on other duties?
The staff in the jail has turned over completely since this event occurred, and it does turn over. I don't allow people to stay there very long because I don't want them to become, brutalized or whatever. I mean, and let's not get the impression that people go there to be brutal. You know, we're only talking about a very small piece of the action here. Not a good one, but it's only a very small piece of the action.
My thanks to Bob Stewart, Chief Constable of the City of Vancouver. Next, the Solicitor General of Canada. Boy, we're legal this morning, after the break. The calls were terrible.
2, 1.
From the top policeman in Vancouver, Bob Stewart, to the man who is, I suppose, the top policeman in Canada. He's responsible for the RCMP in your Department of Solicitor General, Mr. Beatty.
That's right.
Not? Now, we all know that the Charter's full of holes and going to be corrected 1,000 times, and there's a growth industry for the legal profession. It seems like the new Young Offenders Act is not much different, doesn't it?
There are problems with the Young Offenders Act, Jack. It's a massive change from the old Juvenile Delinquents Act. There are a number of problems with it. We're going to be introducing amendments in Parliament probably in April.
But you've got to tell us what the problems are. I mean, what about that? There's one case that comes to mind, I don't know if it's you or Justice, you or Crosby, where the boy killed 3 people and he only gets 3 years maximum in jail. Is that your fault because of the Young Offenders Act?
It's not a question of fault. It's a matter that the Young Offenders Act has a statutory maximum of 3 years for an offense. Anybody who's tried under the Act gets a maximum of 3 years, but Parliament built into the Act a provision that says that if the penalty isn't adequate, if it's obvious that if a person's convicted, the penalty will be inadequate, then the Crown has the right to apply for a transfer to adult court. And perhaps in a case like this, this is what should be done.
That is the Act now.
Yes.
That youngster, therefore, could have gone to adult court and been dealt with as an adult.
Yes, but the Crown decided not to apply for transfer.
So there's no need, though, for an amendment to the Act on that,
As it relates to that particular item,
to
no.
that particular... Now, what about right now, though? I can be the worst juvenile criminal in the whole country. And I mean that. We all know there are juvenile criminals with records as long as your arm. When I become 18, my record's destroyed?
I think what we want to do is to say that there are cases where young people make mistakes and they should be given a second chance. Sure, there are going to be cases where people become hardened criminals at a young age, but Parliament really looks at 3 levels. The over 18s are people who will be dealt with exclusively as adults. Between 12 and 18, we say, okay, people are maturing here. There's different degrees of maturity or judgment. Kids can make mistakes. We should try to give them another chance. Then there are the under 12s, where people are really too young to be considered in a criminal context. The Young Offenders Act really comes in between those two, and we're trying to strike a balance there.
Yeah, but on that, am I right at the moment that a record is destroyed?
Yes.
Supposing I'm a youngster who kills a couple of little children, not guilty by reason of insanity, that record is also destroyed.
This is one of the changes that I want to make. Obviously, I had a case in my own constituency where a young person was found not guilty by reason of insanity after having killed 2 children.
Right.
It appears as if the Act as it's written today would require that all of the records be destroyed, even though they'd be useful for the people who are going to be treating this person. I'm going to change that.
Do you think the Young Offenders Act was really a good move from 12 to 17? Do you think it was?
Sorry, from 12 to 17?
Well, I'm talking about the fact that everyone is now entitled to legal aid and you're going to have to pay for it.
I think that what it represents is a dramatic change in philosophy, Jack. The old Juvenile Delinquents Act said that every young person who was in trouble with the law was a misguided child and should be dealt with in that context. The Young Offenders Act says, no, we recognize that you have special needs or special problems as a young person, but at the same time you're going to be held accountable for your action. And you're going to have the same rights and the same obligations as adults. One of those rights, obviously, is the protections that's given to you by the Charter, the right to counsel.
I'm the 12-year-old, you're my lawyer, right?
Sir.
And I've just gone on a rampage somewhere. My lawyer says, don't make any statements. Don't admit you're guilty. We can get you off on a technicality. Is that not what's going to happen for these youngsters who should be dealt with much more informally?
Jack, you're a 65-year-old and you commit an offense and you go and see your lawyer. Is he going to say to you, you should admit that you did it, you should make any statement that you want, or is he going to counsel you as to what your rights are? The principle's clear that either you're entitled to counsel or else you aren't. We hope that counsel will be responsible, whether for young people or for adults. A case in my own constituency that I mentioned earlier was a case where the counsel was very responsible. There was an agreement between the Crown and the defense counsel to plead not guilty by reason of insanity because this is a young person who could benefit from treatment, and society required that as well.
In other words, you're saying that I'm just being cynical. When I might say to you to provoke you that all it's going to do for 12 and 13-year-olds is teach them how to evade their responsibilities, you'd say I'm too cynical.
Jack, you could make exactly the same argument about the role of defense counsel for adults. Is there something magical about the age of 19 that suddenly people should learn to be a liar at the age of 19, but they should be honest before that? People should be honest no matter what. And the role of a defense lawyer as an officer of the court is to serve the needs of justice. But there is no magic age there at which this responsibility changes.
You're also responsible for the National Parole Board, aren't you?
Yes, sir.
That's one of your happier portfolios. You're planning major changes in that, aren't you?
There are a number of changes we're making, particularly to the parole system at the present time and to the mandatory supervision system, where automatically today an inmate would get out after 2/3 of his sentence unless he's committed some sort of a...
Regardless of his state of mind or state of rehabilitation or his sexual, for instance, evil propensities.
Automatically straight out the door unless you've committed some offense.
Are you going to change that?
Yes. We have legislation before Parliament right now that's going to say if an individual was sent to prison for a violent offense, secondly, if the case management staff say that, in their view, this person is not ready for reintroduction to the street, for the first time we're going to empower the parole board to have a hearing and say, should this person be getting out after 2/3 of his sentence automatically, or should we be able to hold him for the duration of his warrant?
That's where they tried before and failed to hold people, arrest people at the gate, right?
That's right, and that's why we're bringing in legislation to give the parole board that power.
I see, too, you made a remark the other day which I thought, Perrin Beatty's a nice guy with good instincts, but he won't get away with it. To put prisoners,
Which one was this?
To put prisoners to work for useful employment.
Yeah, it's my feeling, having toured the institutions, Jack, that there's not enough work in prisons and not enough prisoners are working, that I want to bring down that cost of $40,000 per inmate per year that is costing the taxpayers. And I want to see inmates starting to pay back society for the debt they owe society.
There's another thing you're going to do, I believe. If I've got cash from a big drug haul, if I have a couple of $1 million, you can seize it from me.
You can't today, and that's the thing that's
You
disgraceful.
can't?
No.
I thought if you found a bag of money, well, what can you do? Just tell the income tax?
If you found a bag of money, yes, you could. But if you put the money in the bank, there was a case in Montreal where a drug dealer sold drugs. He was convicted of having done that, took the proceeds, had them in a bank account, and the courts found that the RCMP couldn't seize the proceeds because these were deemed to be non-tangible assets.
Well,
and I think that's just plain wrong.
In other words, if I buy a $1 million yacht, and if I put the money in the bank, and if I put it into real estate, even if I'm convicted, I retain the proceeds of my crime.
And the difficulty is that crime literally can pay. If you have $3 million sitting in a bank account waiting for you when you get out, a 2-year jail sentence doesn't seem that terrible.
Will you get that through the House without any fuss? I should imagine you will, won't you?
Well, the previous government tried to do it, and they failed in their attempt to get it through.
Well, how could they fail in that?
There was just stiff opposition from a number of groups, but we want to make sure that we have something that...
from the Canadian Association of Cocaine, Hash, Pot Dealers.
I don't think they formally made a representation, but
that's a common sense one. That should be done in a flash.
I think there's a concern that some people have about what happens, Jack, if you take your money and put it into a legitimate business. It's then seized. What happens to the other partners in the business who may not have had any criminal activities at all? We want to make sure that it's well targeted in what we do, but the principle's clear, that people should not be allowed to profit from their crime. We want to make sure we can seize those assets.
More with Perrin Beatty. Have you any questions for the Solicitor General? We haven't talked about the magnificent record of your government.
Oh, I'd be delighted.
You're bugged this morning, you know?
I'm bugged.
Yeah, we both have microphones, but they're both in public.
As long as nobody's listening, it's okay.
That's fair enough. That's probably the likely fact, too. More with Perrin Beatty. I don't mean that nastily. Please forgive me.
I'll check your BBMs afterward, Jack.
After the break. And calls.
Victims.
Missing kids. The child find child. What was it you announced the other day to enable people to get into closer, easier contact with their missing children?
Well, we're going to do a number of things. There's a research project which the ministry will be sponsoring out of Surrey. It's one of 4 communities across the country, Edmonton, Surrey, Toronto, and Montreal, where we'll be doing a 2-year research project on the nature of missing kids, how the police respond, and so on. Secondly, we're making enhancements to the federal government's computer system, CPIC, the police RCMP system, to improve communications and disseminate information about missing kids. I want to hold a conference on missing kids to encourage private sector groups and government to pull together and coordinate. And I want to see what we can do about improving the quality of information to parents about what can you do to protect your child.
Well, yeah, but simple information. If I've got a missing child somewhere, can I get access through the police to children's allowance addresses, old age, or any government allowance addresses, welfare payments?
John Crosby has legislation before Parliament right now in terms of child support, for example, if that's one of your concerns.
No, finding a missing
kid. In terms
kid.
of finding a child. It may be possible to do that. Under the privacy legislation, there's an override that the head of an institution has, if it's in the public interest, to search the files to try to locate somebody.
Now, we just have got this brouhaha in Vancouver about the crime the chief can't solve and who beat up the guy in the city jail. We get complaints over the years about the RCMP, too. Who investigates the RCMP for police brutality?
At the present time, there's strictly an internal procedure, but we have legislation before Parliament today, Jack, which would create an independent police complaints tribunal where people could make a complaint and it would be fully investigated.
An independent tribunal?
That's right.
So if the police don't do a good job, this higher authority will go in and do the job?
It's at arm's length. Anybody will be able to lay a complaint against the RCMP if they feel they've done something wrong. They'll investigate it fully.
I hate to mention it, but your government has promised a free vote and capital punishment. When do we get it?
I suspect it'll be this Parliament. John Crosby is the Minister of Justice, and he's responsible for it. He said in Parliament it'll be during this Parliament.
Go ahead to Perrin Beatty.
Yes, I'm 24 years old now. But when I was 17, I was in a little bit of trouble with the police. I was wondering if that record would be wiped out.
No, because of course the act wasn't in place at the time, but you can certainly apply to have your record expunged if you've been a good citizen since then.
Yeah, no problem since then. Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank
Go
you.
ahead, please.
Oh, Mr. Beatty.
Sir.
That's you.
Well,
Sir, go ahead.
First of all, I'd like to congratulate you on this new program that you're embarking on with young offenders.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, you were a fine cabinet minister in the Joe Clark government, and I can see that you got a good position here with Brian Mulrooney.
Thank you very much.
First of all, the best way to make crime not pay is to let government run it.
One for you. Thank you.
Thank you. He phoned you up to be nice and tell you he's one political joke. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I was wondering, when I was 16, I was charged for impaired driving in Trail.
Yes.
And I was not offered to see a lawyer or nothing, and I pleaded not guilty, and they found me guilty in court right on the first appearance.
How old are you now?
I'm 30 years old now.
I think you can forget about it.
Oh, I can, eh?
Yeah. 14 years ago. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Mr. Webster and Mr. Beatty.
Good morning.
I wanted to ask Mr. Beatty a question regarding the federal penitentiary system in Canada, where
Sure,
they can send a 15-year-old to a St. Vincent de Paul penitentiary in 1961. I mean, this is supposed to be, not law, where you can send a 15-year-old to a penitentiary the first time.
That was in 1961.
Yes.
Well, it was done in BC at that time. I don't think it's.
Oh, it
done.
wasn't in BC.
It was also done. But what's your point?
My point is, how can they do that to a person that's never been arrested before?
Can they
There's
do that?
No record.
I know, fair enough. Can they do it now?
In a case where somebody under the Young Offenders Act were transferred to an adult court, he would stand trial as any adult would, and the penalty would be the same. But that'll be the exception instead of the rule. For the vast majority of cases, they'll be tried under the Young Offenders Act, and they'll be held in youth facilities.
But how can you send?
Well, I'm not going to go into the history of what happened in 1961 in Montreal. Right, clear about that. Go ahead, please.
Yes, good morning, gentlemen. I have a question about the Young Offenders Act.
Gladly.
I know a member of the force, the police force outside of Vancouver, and I know from talking to him there's a tremendous amount of paperwork that has to be done to charge a young offender. And I know for a fact that when it does arise that the gentleman or the lady is a young offender, that they'll just cast a blind eye because there's just so much paperwork involved that it just creates so much hassle.
Paperwork, the best defense counsel. Do you believe that?
Jack, there can be a fair amount of bureaucracy, but it's certainly not the case that charges aren't being laid. There's thousands of charges being laid each year under the Young Offenders Act. But one of the things we're trying to do with these amendments is to streamline a lot of the procedures in order to recognize the needs of the police. I'll give you an example of that, if I could.
Please.
As things stand today, if somebody were arrested in Ontario in Smiths Falls, say that he was taken in at the police station there at 12 o'clock at night, the decision was taken to charge him at 2 o'clock, they'd be required to drive him into Ottawa, which would be the closest approved facility to hold him, an hour and a half away, drive him in there, keep him overnight, first thing in the morning, come back, drive him another hour and a half back to court. It makes no sense at all, and we want to streamline that procedure and say if you have a separate cell in a separate area where you can keep him away from older
adult
prisoners,
criminals,
then let's use some common sense.
See, once
here.
the law has been written, common sense can't apply.
We hope to introduce a little bit of common sense into the system.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, I was just wondering, I just wanted to ask a question. I did something wrong one time and had an impaired charge, but I went to jail and got my time, and I had to go before a parole board and prove that, hey, I'm eligible, I'm a good person, and I can get out.
Right.
While I was there were people that had defraudulently moved money of $90,000 that were getting a year, and I got 4 months just for impaired driving, no accident, anything. And I wanted to say thanks for the program prior to that with the jail cells, and that, it's just that most of the public that are good people look at the police for comfort, for all of the things in security, and for them to do a number of these things really starts to make the public think a lot.
Well, I'll tell you, conditions in the Vancouver City Jail are way better than they were when I was a policeman around the cop shop. You are quite strong, though, on the fact that too many non-violent offenders are behind bars.
Yes, I've had a chance now, Jack, as an outsider, to come in and begin to tour the system. The prison system is very good if it means keeping a violent offender out of society, keeping him off the streets. But in terms of reforming people, we don't do a good job at all. We've got programs, but our success rate isn't as high as it should be. I'd like to see us look at alternatives, which would bring down that $40,000 a year apiece cost, which would ensure that the victims start getting paid back. which would make it easier to rehabilitate an individual and which would keep him out of what's in essence a school for crime. All too often, a person finds himself rubbing shoulders with the worst elements in society, and what he does is he becomes educated as a criminal.
The old short, sharp sentences weren't all that bad in the old days, were they?
I think so, and it's horrendous that today, on average, for the federal system, it's between $40,000 and $50,000 a year. To build a new bed is $150,000, and I've got pensioners and farmers in my constituency couldn't put that money to better use.
Yeah. I have a feeling, you know, that if your government can keep its foot out of its mouth, you might become a very good minister.
Jack, you're always flattering.
My thanks very much indeed to Perrin Beatty, the Solicitor General. Next, another Tory. Oh, my God. Ted Schellenberg from Nanaimo after the break. I'm getting a little bit vacant in my old age. Ted Schellenberg, who's an MP for Nanaimo, said he used to work with me at NW, and you were winding tape onto cartridges.
Yeah. You were at the top of the heap and I was at the bottom, and we passed each other in the hallway. I don't know why you can't remember me, Jack.
Yeah.
One of the biggest guys around.
And you are, in fact, a broadcaster to trade.
Oh, yes, from Nanaimo, Seakeg and Nanaimo.
Well, in the name, why did you take this dreadful step to destruction by becoming a conservative and the MP for Nanaimo-Alberni?
Keith Spicer said that the best kind of politician is a former broadcaster, businessman type, who gets in there and can communicate with people and can communicate ideas, which is basically why I'm here today.
Okay, no questions. What are you here for?
I'm here for the mug, actually, Jack. These things in Ottawa are a symbol that you've been to the mountaintop and you've gone through the hellfires of Jack Webster, so that's why I'm here.
You can have the mug, but you have to pay for it.
All right, well, I'm going to start paying for it now. Yeah. Action for Jobs is what it's all about. We held a conference last November in Parksville, in the middle of my riding, in Nanaimo-Alberni, and what we did is we sat down with people from all areas, businessmen, entrepreneurs, investors, and labor, and politicians even, and we tried to decide where we were going to go in the area. As you know, for many years, British Columbia pretty well didn't exist in Ottawa, and
still doesn't.
Well, now we've got 19 solid Tories out there who are trying to get the message home. The problem is that the way most of these programs are structured in Ottawa, you've got to have a square peg to go into a square hole. And British Columbia, oddly enough, is different than Central Canada. You can tell that by the unemployment rate alone. So we decided we'd get together and try and find out where we were going on the Central Island, what we could do to utilize what we had, you know, which are fish and trees and tourism, and expand the economic base.
Okay, so you had the conference. You got government grants to put it on.
No,
did you?
I got some help from the Harbour Commission in Nanaimo, the Harbour Commission in Port Alberni.
And are we concerned with the whole of Vancouver Island, or only your part of it?
Central Vancouver Island's where I'm from, but it's spilling over when you start talking about aquaculture or specified wood products.
So you brought all these people in, and what have you done now? Just talk?
Nope.
Well, tell me.
Well, I don't like talk. I don't like studies, and I don't like things that are filed away and forgotten. So what we did is we came up with a game plan, which you have in front of you.
Right.
We looked at aquaculture, greenhouse agriculture, specialty wood products, tourism, retirement, etc. Nanaimo as of the 21st of January, and we have 2 tenants there already, 2 tenants who met at Action for Jobs and weren't aware that they had complementary industries.
You've built a high-tech park at Malaspina College.
We've announced a high-tech park that is going to be built at Malaspina College, right.
And you've already got tenants for a couple of the buildings.
Yes. And
what are they going to be making?
They are involved in computers, high-tech.
High-tech,
Yep.
Okay.
Now, the other aspect, as you can see in this brochure, is that we came up with the retirement industry as a nice non-polluting industry for Vancouver Island.
I mean, old people with pensions.
Sure, retiring off to Vancouver Island. One of the ideas that came out of the conference was to fly over Moose Jaw in the middle of winter and throw Vancouver Island daffodils out the window. That would get the message home.
It certainly would.
You know, it was crazy enough to work, actually. So what's come out of that is that Jake Epp, our health minister, is now looking at funding some geriatric research in the area, because a lot of that money now goes to Central Canada, but a lot of the retired people come to Vancouver Island. So why not study the issue and perhaps build a center?
You're saying have a new kind of immigration policy for Vancouver Island,
sure,
and go through the prairies and say, come and live in Vancouver.
Bring all that capital investment you've got from your farm in the prairies and come and live where the weather is beautiful.
Have you done any? You might bring a few thousand people in.
Exactly.
Except that the prairie people with money do that anyway as a matter of course, don't they?
Well, we want them in Nanaimo and Port Alberni and Parksville and Qualicum, not Victoria.
You want to get them away from Victoria.
That's right.
What else have you done?
Well, what else do we have here? The Retirement Council, we've established that. We're talking about aquaculture. One of the fellows that we met at the seminar from Prince Rupert is now looking at real estate in Nanaimo. We've put him together with a facility to develop fish feed for aquaculture farms, and that's well underway.
Have you got any of these salmon operations up there?
Oh yes,
salmon?
oh yes. The salmon enhancement program is well underway in Nanaimo-Alberni.
Is the provincial government cooperating with you?
Sure, but we want them to cooperate more. I know Tom Siddon was on your program, and one of the aspects of SEP 2, which we're now trying to initiate, is getting more contributions from the provincial government. They now put in about 5% of the funding, and we want more.
What's the unemployment rate in central Vancouver Island at the moment?
Too high. It's Vancouver Island as a whole went up 0.3% in January to 17 even. Victoria went up a whole percentage, from 14 point whatever to 15.
And Nanaimo will be what, about 15 or 16?
Probably, yes. And that doesn't count the people that have dropped off the rolls.
And the real estate prices firming up at all in Nanaimo?
Yes, they are. Actually, construction is starting to boom now. I think we're on the precipice.
You've got this young guy here from Newcastle Island. I'm going to bring him on because I rather like what they're doing at Newcastle Island and what they're planning to do. And we'll take one segment of calls to Ted Schellenberg and a young fellow called Routledge who's coming on. Jim Routledge of the Newcastle Island Pavilion Society after the break. To my eternal shame, I've never been on Newcastle Island. I know it's off Nanaimo. Here's Jimmy Routledge, who's trying a fancy operation. Tell me about it, Jimmy.
Well, it's not that fancy. It's kind of a secret, really. We've been trying to keep it under wraps, but basically Newcastle Island's been around for a long time. It goes back to the 1850s. It actually predates a lot of the Vancouver development. But in a nutshell, it's a place where people have been having fun for about 100 years.
The first recreational island in British Columbia. It's just off Nanaimo. Is it developed or is it all provincial park?
It is a provincial marine park, and they've preserved it beautifully for the last 20 years. But it's a situation where there's been basically 6 major industries on the island, and it's always it's been kept originally and
as it was.
As it was.
This is an old CPR pamphlet. It cost you $1.50. Where was it to get to Newcastle Island?
$1.50 return in the 1930s would take you over for a day, and
that was from Vancouver.
From Vancouver. That was back in the days when people didn't have the mobility and the cars.
And they had pavilions, tea gardens, outdoor checkerboard, bandstand, playing fields, horseshoe pits, switches, children's playgrounds, race tracks, picnic tables, wading pools, sand pits, first aid station, high swings and treats, bleachers, swimmer float, swimming area, wharf, bathhouse, children's beach, quarry, and park warden's house. Are any of the old developments left?
Yes, as a matter of fact, the bulk of the CPR resort era facilities, which the CPR established during the 30s, are there. The dance pavilion, which is the facility that our society is responsible for, was restored with some help from the province and the government of Canada, and we've been putting a program together to be able to have weddings and banquets and
You're a non-profit society?
That's right. We're trying to basically develop it so the...
Weren't there mines in Newcastle Island at one time?
2 coal mines, the Douglas mine and the Fitzwilliam mine, took coal out of there since 1850.
And there's still, the mines are still there, of course,
yes,
obviously.
Yeah, and as well there's a sandstone quarry.
Is this part of your tourist attraction program?
Very much so. I mean, how many cities have a provincial park right in the midst of their harbor? Nanaimo is quite an attraction that way.
Well, how do you get to Newcastle Island?
Well, the ferries that the BC government run take you over to Nanaimo, and then we have shuttle service to the island.
And that's what I'm talking about, you know, shuttle service in small boats.
That's right.
Newcastle Island. You can't take cars on.
No, we'd like to make the whole experience start from the minute you leave the shore.
Is it an attempted recreation of the 30s?
Well, that aspect of it is, you know, because that was such a thriving industry back in the 30s, there was a number of operations. BC Steamships took people to Bowen Island, and there was another group that took them to Belcarra Park.
Back to you, though. What have you had from the Tory government for job creation? How many job creation projects have you got in Nanaimo, and how many jobs have you created? Because when somebody tells me there are 55,000 new jobs in BC or 25, I don't believe them.
Well, we have. In the last month alone, $2 million has gone into Nanaimo-Alberni in stream enhancement enhancement. I mean, that's stream enhancement and working in the forests.
You get that money for them, do you?
Well, it's a process that we work through government, and you talk to the minister. And
Is
you
this
do what you can.
kind of like the old LIP grants?
No. What we've done, as you know, through Flora MacDonald, is try and reorient people from painting park benches and rearranging filing cabinets into stream enhancement and reforestation projects, which is where we should be putting that money in BC. You know.
And $2 million's all you've got?
In the past month, Jack.
Oh, how much have you got altogether?
Oh, I don't add those things up on a regular basis. $1.5 million on reforestation with the Vancouver Island Mayor's Strategy for Survival. I'll get you a list if you want.
No. But
we're doing okay. We're doing okay.
An active MP can always, especially if he's a government member, can get more than his fair share.
If you know how to communicate, yes, Jack.
If you know the right ministers.
You bet.
I've got a couple of calls. Here's what call from Parksville. I think I'll go for a game of golf. Go ahead from Parksville.
Yes, good morning, Mr. Schellenberg. How are you this morning?
I'm alive and well, thank you.
Good. I noticed in the Nanaimo Times the other day, Stanley Burke criticizing this Action for Jobs seminar as just another study. Would you care to comment on that? And secondly, before I hang up, how does this activity differ from the Make Work projects of the previous government, specifically any activity that the previous member was able to do in the area?
Well,
very much.
Okay, thank you. I think, as I pointed out earlier in the program, we have already 2 or 3 of these recommendations have come to the fore and are reality in Nanaimo-Alberni. So I don't think it's just another study. Lord knows we've got enough of those. It's much different than the average study. And as far as what I've done as opposed to the previous member, well, I guess the proof is in the pudding in 1988. I think people will know.
Who is Stanley Burke?
Stanley Burke, I've heard the name. He's the publisher of the Nanaimo Times, former national broadcaster, Jack.
CBC fellow.
Yeah, he used to do the national news.
Did he?
Yes, you remember Stanley.
No, it's before my time. Where am I going?
Such a young man.
Kamloops, go ahead, please.
Yeah, good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Yeah, what we're doing, we're retiring.
Yes.
And we went over the island, and we drove and drove and drove. Where can we locate?
Right.
Where can we get some ready information concerning the area, concerning the weather, concerning the prices? Do you have brochures like that?
The area is green, the weather is mixed, the prices are the same as the rest of the place. It depends how much money you've got.
We have information in my constituency offices, sir, or the Vancouver Island Real Estate Board, or any Chamber of Commerce on the island. We can get it to you. Simply write to me at Box 2440 in Parksville. We'll get it to you.
You can write to you free in the House of Commons.
You can write to me free in Parksville, too.
Sure. What do you mean write to you free
Or
in
if you
Parksville?
address a letter to a member of Parliament, it'll get there.
If I write it to your house?
Pardon me?
If I mail a letter to your private residence, does that go free?
Well, the assumption is that you're writing to me on public business, yes.
So therefore you get your private mail delivered to you for free?
I do not. I mail my private mail with 34-cent stamps.
No, but you can write home free.
I don't.
But you can.
I could.
What a scandalous piece of corruption.
That's what we got rid of in 1984, Jack. New breed of politician.
People who can write their homes without putting stamps on them.
People who are trying to represent British Columbia and Ottawa. No.
That is a joke, in case you didn't get it. Where am I going? Where am I going?
Jack, I might just say something about Ted's Actions for Jobs seminar because I know when I arrived there, I was a bit surprised to find so many other people in the same sort of area that I was working in. And if nothing else, the people being able to talk to each other and see each other in a forum where it's all, exhibited with the rest of the community, it was really interesting.
Listen, I like your enthusiasm. I like your Newcastle Island Society. If you want to know anything about the Newcastle Island Pavilion Society, you're bringing on dances there, huh?
That's right. We're restoring the whole experience of the 1930s.
Phone Jimmy at 753-1191. My thanks to you, Ted Schellenberg.
Thank you, Jack. Can I take the mug back to Ottawa?
You can take the mug to Ottawa, certainly.
Well, as Barbara Frum says, thank you so much.
You don't even look like it. Thanks, Jimmy Routledge. Back for a free-for-all after this break. I recommend nothing. I recommend a long life and a happy one. Go ahead, please.
Hi, Jack.
Yeah.
Terry Van Sater's calling.
Oh, the ex-Mountie.
Yes, I was on your show a few months ago. Thanks very much.
That's right.
I'm sorry I didn't get to
speak to Mr. Beatty, but I understand that the present commissioner is about to retire from the force, and apparently with him leaving, the bilingual policy is going out as well. I wonder if you were aware of that.
Well, it won't be going out. You mean it's going to be a little looser for recruitment?
Apparently, yes, they're supposed to be relaxing it.
Well, I
the
think
commissioner designate isn't too pleased with some of the quality of policemen that have joined the force.
Who's the commissioner designate, Terry?
I'm afraid I don't know his name, Jack. I understand he's coming out of C Division, which is back east somewhere, and I believe he's bilingual himself.
Well, you know, I think perhaps you helped to get the message across that when you consider the number that BC is the biggest recruiter of people for the RCMP, that the proportion of necessary bilingualism has been grossly overdone.
Right. I believe there's a chance for us now, Jack, for some of us ex-members to get back in and do our job again.
I wish you'd got through when Beatty was here. I needed a call like that.
Yes, I would like to have spoken to him too, but thanks very much, Jack.
If I see him down at this thing, I'll ask him again. Much obliged.
Yes, thanks.
Bye. As a matter of interest, I'm going to show you a little exchange in the House of Commons which makes me feel warm and comfortable and happy. And it comes from an NDP MP, not Sven Robinson, though, Jim Fulton from Skeena.
I also have a petition, Mr. Speaker, signed by residents of the Queen Charlotte Islands, Vancouver Island, and other areas of British Columbia who are concerned that Jack Webster from BCTV has repeatedly aired shows that present only one side of a very complex issue, and that's with regard to Lyell Island. And the petitioners from all over British Columbia call on this House of Commons to make sure that Mr. Webster's personal vendetta against native rights and environmental groups in fomenting trouble and creating an atmosphere of hostility is brought to his attention. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Ray Natish, the government leader, just brushed him aside. That's the man, Fulton, who will not come on this program because he doesn't want to be questioned by me at all. I've invited him again and again and again when he had a beard and since he hasn't had a beard, because he looks totally different now. You wouldn't realize it's the same shabby-looking guy who campaigns up north and won't come to Vancouver. But now that he's got a new city slicker image, I'm sure he'll be willing to come. And he had the gall to present a petition asking the House of Commons to condemn me because of a personal vendetta. And you know it's not true, and I know it's not true, and Fulton knows it's not true. Now I'm getting angry. Say it under your breath. Under my breath. Say it again under your breath. Under my breath. I like free-for-alls. Go ahead, please.
Yes, did you ever find out what that guru did to create that powder out of his hands? And by the way, do you
I
feel
can do it
better
myself.
since you rubbed
I can
on
do
your
it myself
forehead?
now. Watch, watch. It's not going to work today.
Well, I want to say this, Jack, that in the Sun paper the next day they had a story on him and said that he uses ESP in astrology.
Right.
And I'm deadly against that.
So am I.
Good.
Hate it, but he told me I had a little heart trouble.
Oh.
Yeah, he did. And then he gave me the magic dust which cured my heart trouble.
Yeah. Do you actually think that that came out of his hands or what? Or do you think it came from underneath his sleeve or what?
I think it's angel dust that eased from his sensitive inner soul up to his armpits and down a little rubber tube into the palm of his eye. I don't know.
Yeah,
But
well,
I
know.
like the
I
guy.
just thought it's of interest. But
No,
anyways, I hope people look at him in a critical way, because a lot of people are falling hook, line, and sinker towards this guy.
We'll look at him in a critical way.
I look at him as a cult.
Critical.
All righty. Bye-bye.
Bye. Why didn't I do a free-for-all all morning this morning and have some fun? Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Jack.
Morning.
Just relating back to Chief Stewart's appearance on your program, where he made the comment that putting these people through another internal hearing at the police level wouldn't accomplish anything, putting these people through the hoops. I've been following in the paper a case that's been 5 years now within the internal hearings. It's gone through all the internal hearings into the Supreme Court of British Columbia, and judgment handed down by the appellate court upholding the Supreme Court on an internal hearing with the Vancouver Police Board. And it's now going through the police board again. This is the case of one David Wiley. I'm just wondering who pays for these things. Mr. Stewart says that there be no point, and he's not in favor of prolonging these internal inquiries. And yet here's one that's going into its fifth year now.
Chief Stewart was telling me, and he told you too, that the police have exactly the same protection as citizens as anyone else, and that he cannot even suspend without reasonable and proper cause, which will be stand up in court. The police union, I think, pays the costs of disciplinary actions. The police, the city council finances all the other legal actions, and even the attempt to remove a reprimand from a record can cost thousands and thousands of dollars.
Well, apparently the reporting that's been done by the Vancouver Sun on this case doesn't uphold those statements that you've just made. This case is being paid for by this constable on his own, apparently, and apparently he's on welfare now, and he's having an awful hard time finding work. And it's
in that case, he was. I don't know the case.
Crown prosecutor.
He must have been
He wasn't
fired.
available for a certain case on a certain day when.
Yeah.
So I wish you'd investigate that one a little further. The Sun,
No.
it comes out in blurbs and blabs. So.
I won't investigate that one because I've neither the time nor the staff, though I do have the interest. But this particular case that I was discussing this morning, and which I described in the bluntest possible terms, demonstrate very much that perhaps there should be a little less strict protection for policemen in the execution of
Well,
their
I
duties.
think with Expo coming up and everything, this certainly doesn't do the image of Vancouver any good at all.
Dreadful,
I mean, this
dreadful.
is things you'd expect in the southern states, not in British Columbia.
Good point, man. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Jack.
What?
That's shameful, the misrepresentation by Fulton regarding your position on native rights.
I don't know if he was trying to be funny or not. I have given more airtime and more equal time to Indian causes, native causes in British Columbia as much as any other broadcaster. There is not an Indian leader in British Columbia that has not been on this program, and often when they ask, not when I decide, and not been given a full and fair opportunity to present his case. And that goes for the hiders as well as anybody else.
Certainly. Jack, what I'm calling about is just to make a point. I know that the federal government has been receiving a lot of criticism for reversing its position on policy decisions, and I find it refreshing. They're realizing after they've come out and made a decision that there's errors in it, and they are willing to change their mind, which the Three Stooges, Trudeau, McKechnie, and Lalonde were never willing to do.
That little man, Beatty, is really quite well informed. He's certainly very forthright in his own way. He seems to know his portfolio. I must say, well, you got to give them some credit, but there's too much charm and smarm in the Tories. That's my complaint. Go ahead, please.
Jack.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm sorry I didn't get you sooner, but I didn't know your number. I'd like to have had you and talked to you when Mr. Beatty was there.
Mm-hmm.
I'm from New Westminster, and now we have no penitentiary. And I'm wondering now, why do we need penitentiaries? Why couldn't we job this sort of thing out? Let's get in touch with the Mexicans and the Turks, and it costs us $40,000 a year. Maybe the Mexicans might do it for $5,700 a year, or the Turks for $52,000. But let's get a little bidding game on this.
Yeah, export of prisoners would be a good cash
No,
crop.
I think so. You know, we might save $30,000 or $40,000 a year.
Not a bad idea.
Okay.
Matter of fact, if we got them put on bread and water diets and kept in tents
right.
surrounded by...
This is my Scottish ancestry coming out. I thought you might appreciate.
I'll suggest that for the provincial institutions, because if anybody's going to privatize anything, Bill Bennett would. We could export them to Alberta.
Okay, sure.
That's a good idea. Take it up. It's
Okay.
our new political party, that'll be our first plank. Export, subsidize, and export all offenders of any kind out of the province and keep the place nice and quiet and peaceful. Go ahead. That's a joke.
Hello, Jack.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, good morning, Jack. I was wondering, you take summer hiatus. I was wondering if you will be doing Expo coverage or if you will take the summer off this year.
I'm sure you'll see my chubby little old cheeks appearing from time to time at Expo 86.
Looking forward to
I
it.
would be in such a snit if people didn't know me at Expo.
Thank you very much.
Bye. Webster.
Good morning. We could have our own Devil's Island, eh?
Yes, matter of fact, Newcastle Island might not. No, we could have our own Devil's Island.
Well, anyway, the reason I'm calling is I wanted to ask you why you didn't let phone calls on John Parks the other day. I sat up all the night before thinking up a tricky question to ask him.
John Parks?
Sure.
Was he on the program?
Well, yeah,
He's
actually
so
he was in there a week
easy
ago
to
or 2
forget.
weeks ago.
Oh, I only had him on for, we were stuck that morning and we needed some filler material.
Oh,
So we just...
well, I'll tell you though. I read this quote in the newspaper that he said he thought it was criminal that the federal government was giving grants to a economic think tank that was socialist oriented, and I just wanted to ask him why he thought socialism was such an evil in the province, and if he'd want to mount a campaign to scourge it, as it were.
Yeah, he would.
Anyway, that's about it. Thank you
Good,
very much.
much obliged. Can't seem to do two things at once this morning. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I was thinking it would be nice to take a little shot at Brian Smith for a change here. Back in November 25th, the motorcycle helmet law was appealed and thrown out of court on the Charter of Rights, and they didn't have any specific quality of helmet. But Brian Smith comes on TV and he says, well, we're not going to waste the taxpayers' money appealing it. He says, we're just going to change it. And he effectively overruled the Supreme Court because of the Charter of Rights, and he's never let anybody know what the changes were. And I was wondering...
I'll ask him.
Yeah.
I'll ask him, that's a promise. Somebody write it down. Brian Smith, motorcycle helmets, overriding the Supreme Court, changing the law, making them wear helmets. I'll be back after the break. We've had so many calls about problems with unemployment insurance that tomorrow we're going to have the Chief Benefit Officer and a Benefit Program Officer of the UIC on the program to answer specific questions about claims and benefits. Not specific cases, but specific questions. And this whole pension business of not drawing a UIC until they've satisfied the pension is worrying to a lot of people. That tomorrow at 9 a.m. precisely.
Expo 86. 78 days to go.
A close look at Pogie. That's right, Pogie, at 9 a.m. precisely.